Please welcome Mr. Burt as he speaks about the history of the 440. Yeah.
Glad to be here. To start, I'll tell you, a guy took a mule to be trained. If you know anything about mules, they have a disposition of their own. He took him to be trained, he turned him over to the trainer. The first thing the trainer did was took the 2x4 and hit him over the head. He said, I want you to train him, not kill him. He says, not to get his attention first. You got to hit him. You got to get a mule's attention first before you can train him. So I'll attempt to get your attention here and proceed. So it's great that I've got a captive audience. You have to be here. Furthermore, you're getting paid to be here. As long as you're on pay status and you're on mandatory status, no matter what happens, at least you'll benefit from it that much. So at least I have a captive audience. This all started, the story that I'm telling you, on February the 27th, 1917. Now that's when I was born. Keep you from straining your brain to trying to figure that out. That means I'll be 88 years old in February. So you don't have to worry about that. I'll establish that. In 1930, I went to Raleigh High School, junior high school, which was downtown, and then over to Hugh Morrison. And this is what I think you might be interested in. In 1930, a guy came to direct the Raleigh High School band and bring his band there. His name was John Phillips Sousa. John Phillips Sousa brought his band to Raleigh, and the Raleigh High School band, which I had just joined. And I'll confess at this point, I didn't know John Phillips Sousa from Adam's Hatch Cat. But it was just a guy named John Phillips Sousa. And he directed the high school band, played a concert beforehand to get the people there, and so forth. He directed the high school band. This I can remember, an old man leaning up here and directing like this. That's what I remember John Phillips Sousa as he directed. And he died about 2 years later. Sousa died, I think it was in Reading, Pennsylvania. He was going there to direct the Reading Town Band, and he died in the hotel there in 1932. So this was about 2 years before Sousa died. I enlisted in the 120th Infantry Band in January the 1st, 1932, at 14 years of age, 2 months before my 15th birthday. Now that was not unusual. Through the Civil War and all, there were boys, many boys, many stories about them. To keep from telling a lie, they'd write 18 on a sheet of paper and put it in their shoes and say, I'm over 18. That's written up in the books. There are many things like that. And I'm over 18. They did that. Well, I enlisted at 14. I have 2 brothers that did it. How would you get it? You made 75 cents a day. That's what you made. Actually, we had 12 assemblies a year. We called them drills. We had 12 drills a year, but you only got paid for 9. They had to save money, so you only got paid for 9, which took the $1 a day down to 75. And you didn't know which 9. The commander picked the 9 that had the highest attendance. So you didn't know until you got there, so you go all the time. So we had that's the way we established that. I stayed in it, continuous service, for 47 years and 2 months. Now with that age, and I got a 2-year extension after I retired from the band. So between the two, I picked up 47 years and 2 months of continuous service. I was in reserve for 1 year in the National Guard Reserve, which they had at that time. In May 1940, after 8 years in the band, I was appointed bandmaster, May of 1940. is when I was appointed Warrant Officer Bandmaster, one grade of Warrant Officer. In the same year, 1940, I married, went on maneuvers 2 weeks later. That's typical at that time and what that did. So my marriage didn't get off to a start, so went on maneuvers. At maneuvers, we went to, in those particular maneuvers, we went to Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas. They were fighting that way. Well, one side and the other as you cross. Well, we had to go from Mississippi through New Orleans up to Texas. And how do you cross the Mississippi River? There's no bridge across the Mississippi River. You do it now, but it wasn't then. So you go up to a barge, break the train loose, and put the train cars on the barge. The barge goes across the river and then pull it back off. That's the way we went from into New Orleans and up into Texas. So just now I want to mention some dignitaries that we played for. Played for Winston Churchill. He came to this country to try to get us to send more supplies and stuff over to visit with President Roosevelt. He came to Fort Jackson where we were, and we played a review for him. All right, and he comes up and talks to him. So Churchill came up and talked to me. And we walked back through the band as he talked to different band members and asked about the instruments. Very interesting, of course, smoking a cigar all the time. So I had that contact. I'm just name dropping and admittedly. And I'm skipping on over. In 1944, February of 1944, after having been in service now for 3.5 years, we've been through maneuvers 3 times. Now you've got to know what maneuvers are, and you can't believe them unless you've been. Anybody been on maneuvers? Actually, field maneuvers.
Yeah.
All right. Yes, that's different. That's usually of a court dimension. Usually about 100,000 people men in that time in maneuvers. Well, we went through that training cycle 3 times. We were ready to go to war. If you go through maneuvers all the way up from squad, we didn't have basic training then. I was given in the unit all the way up to division training, corps training, and into full-scale field maneuvers. Right, we went over to England in 1944. I'll tell you only this much. On the convoy, we went out of Camp Miles Standish, out of the Boston Port of Embarkation. I'll give a few more details on that a little later if I have time. I'm skipping ahead to names. We got into England, and on one occasion we were playing a review for General Field Marshal Sir George Montgomery, the Field Marshal. Now he was a Field Marshal. We didn't have a Field Marshal in the American Army, did we? We had them in the German Army. They had them in every other army, but we didn't have a Field Marshal. Did you ever wonder why? Because the Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army, who would have been that rank, was George C. Marshall. He says there will be no Marshall. That's fact. There'll be no Marshall. And he persuaded the Congress to what did they make Eisenhower eventually, not then. Anybody ever know?
General
General
of the Army.
What?
General of the Army.
General of the Army, right. So they created the rank General of the Army because they wanted Eisenhower. We wouldn't go to there unless Eisenhower was in charge. So, but it took a long time to get that through. So that's why I thought you'd be interested in why there was no Marshal in the American Army. Then when we were in England, we were there about 6 months before the war, before the invasion. We, in uniform all the time, we didn't have civilian clothes. Uniform all the time. You were forbidden to have civilian clothes. And so you went everywhere. You could get on any train, any bus, go anywhere, no pay. Just step on the bus and go. So I went usually by myself. I was a warrant officer, so I didn't travel with enlisted people. No, didn't travel with commissioned officers. The warrant officers are kind of in between, off-brand. But that's an advantage. Why they say that all enlisted men will do this. Well, that's not me. All officers will do this. That's not me. I'm a warrant officer. I'll do what So I'll do whichever one. And believe me, we warrant officers learn how to use that to our advantage. So I decided I'd go over there. So one day I wanted to go to Oxford. I went to Oxford to see that. Then I wanted to go to Stratford-on-Avon to see where it was. So I went over there. Then I came back to Windsor Castle. And in front of this is another personal story. So when I got to Windsor Castle, truckload after truckload of GIs were going into Windsor Castle. Just drive up to the gate, hand them a piece of paper, and in goes the truck. So I went up to the Bobby on the gate and I said, "What's going on?" He said, "Well, the King and the Queen are taking a review. They're having a review inside." I said, "Well, I'd like to go in." He says, "You can't. You have to have an advance invitation." Well, okay, so we do. But I noticed they didn't count the people in the truck. So I went back down the hill and I stopped the truck. And there's an officer in charge there, and I said, "I'd like to ride in with you." He said, "Well, mine calls for 15 people. I got 15. I said, "They're not counting them." He said, "All right, you can get in the back and you can go through. And if they let you through, but if they have to stop, you'll have to get out." Okay. So in we go. So I broke into Windsor Castle. Well, it was a beautiful show, I'll have to tell you. The Royal Marine Band spread out in the big courtyard playing a song, and under the arches would come troops from different contingents. From Australia playing Waltzing Matilda. Now, you know the tune? Waltzing Matilda is not a waltz.
That's right.
What's Matilda?
Don't know.
The pack on his back. Walking Matilda is taking a hike. So they're playing. So here they play Walking Matilda. I'm trying to tell you things. Matilda's the pack, and Waltzing Matilda is taking a hike. Well, they played that. They played Rule Britannia when the British troops came by. They played the French National Défilé, Le Régiment de Sambre et Meuse, when the French troops came by. All of those, each one by the King and Queen. Well, I wasn't far from where the King and Queen and the two princesses were on the stand. So naturally, after it's over, everybody crowds up around the stand. Now I'm about as close to the stand as your camera there. And I looked up. I looked right straight at Princess Margaret. And Princess Margaret was looking right straight at me. And I winked at her. And she winked at me. And that's my claim to fame. Well, so much for that. But those 3 times I went back. The first time, the division commander said, "Okay, we're here for about 2 weeks." We were up in somewhere near Frankfurt, north of Frankfurt at that time, well into Germany. He says, "We're here. I want you to send half of your men." He had certain passes back to Paris. 3-day passes in Paris. Took 3 days to get there, 3 days to get back. He said, "Send half of the band there, because I want them back here. They've been on 24-hour guard duty, 24 hours a day, and they've done a tremendous job." And he had so many passes, he gave the band, every one of them, a pass to Paris. Half of them went, and by the way, there were 2 warrant officers. See, they put 2 28-piece bands together to make a division band. And I had an assistant, and that's the way they made it. There were 2 warrant officers throughout the war. And so Mr. Webb took half of them and went to Paris. And then I took the other half when they got back and went to Paris. When I got back, where we were actually stayed, they hit us with the first of the rocket bombs. Blew the building up that they were in, killed my first sergeant, killed the captain, and my head goes right with them. I'm here to torment you today simply because I was in Paris at that time when they blew that building up. I had many, many close calls like that, for which I'm thankful that I didn't get hit. I returned to the United States, to the U.S. in November 1945. On the same ship I went over on. Very strange. I was over on the Leif Erikson. We went over on it and came back on it. I drank some milk on the Leif Erikson when we were going over. The next time I tasted milk was on a Leif Erikson coming back. Now, this was 2 years, almost 2 years. You don't have any milk. You have a powdered milk, if you call that milk. But for 2 years, I didn't take a sip of milk. Boy, did I. The first thing I did when I got on the boat, I asked the purser for some milk. And boy, did I sit and drink that, because I love milk. MacArthur. If you remember, General MacArthur was pushed out because his conflict with President Truman. And when he spoke to the Congress, he quoted an old barracks ballad entitled, "Old Soldiers Never Die." You ever heard it? It's in your library, I think, because I borrowed the music from your library because we were playing that parade, and we went by the reviewing stand. I played "Old Soldiers Never Die." And he had already taken his salute. He got up and saluted me again because he recognized that I was playing the "Old Soldiers Never Die" for him. Of course, my sequel to that is "Old Soldiers Never Die." They just bore other people to death. Well, I think I've rambled enough on that. It's time for me to get on with the show. And I don't know where to start and where to talk. It's more emotional, more difficult if you haven't been to war to know what it is. You can't tell. And you live every day, every minute. And if you make it through the day, you're surprised. If you can't imagine living under that type of stress. Okay, now what is combat? You read about 1,000 casualties we've had in Iraq, right? We had 700 casualties in 1 day, in 2 days, by our own Air Force. The 8th Air Force hit us out of the breakout. Smoke blew back over. They hit us the first day. No coordination between the planes. You couldn't stop them. They just kept on bombing. And came back the next day and did the same thing. Their cue was a wind. They had smoke on the ground. But the wind blew the smoke back over the troops. And I'd see guys just screaming and yelling because of being hit, wounded, and dying, and so forth. Now, the casualties, I'm not talking about deaths, but there were 700 casualties in 2 days in Normandy. The 30th Division, plus augmented troops, had 18,000 men. It had 22,000 casualties. 22,000 my division had. You don't get blasé about it. Okay, somebody got killed today. Somebody you know got killed today. I was sleeping on the side of a hedgerow over here. A bum landed on that side of the hedgerow, and we couldn't find a part of that guy. It just happened that I was on the wrong side of the hedgerow. On the right side of the hedgerow, and he wasn't. We had bombs in the field. One of my guys got hit that night. I lay in a trench in a crater with him and held him because it broke his leg. And so he couldn't move. They hit our aid station, and it was burning. With the aid station burning, that was just a target for them to come back and continue bombing. And I held him all night until daylight, until we could get somebody in with a litter to take him off. I've never seen him since. I heard from his brother. Had one guy shot through the eyes. One of my own guys shot right straight through the eyes. He was sent home on the same ship that another one of my guys was on, and they were on bunks across each other and lay there for 2 or 3 days and didn't know they were from the same unit. Because on a troop ship, and if you can't imagine the hell of a troop ship, pardon the French. You can't imagine. If you've been down on E-deck, bunks stacked like this, people puking all over the floor, sloshing all over the floor. That's life in a troop ship. Fortunately, they take them over there now and get them there. Our troop ship going over, we sailed out of Boston Harbor. What was the band's job? They sent the band over a day early to play. Every time a train would come in and load up on a ship, we'd set up and play. Well, that was very good. I got over there a day early, and I found that my men were on E-deck. I went to the purser, and I said, "Can I get them off of E-deck? Can't you put them somewhere else?" He says, the only thing I've got is in the fantail. That's where it has open windows, and the fantail rides up and down a great deal. He says, that might be worse. I said, I'd rather have them on the fantail than in that E-Day, when I saw that was there. So he moved them up on, and I got them up on E-Day. Only half of the band was on that ship. The other half was on the Argentina. It takes three ships to haul a division. It takes 9 trains, 9 fully loaded trains to move a division and its equipment. If you think about that, 9. That's how long it takes. They formed a convoy. We rendezvoused at sea. I have healthy respect for the Navy, how they can figure all that out and maneuver it and hit that spot in the ocean where 33 ships assembled. That was the largest convoy ever assembled to cross the ocean. Over on each side, battleship way over here, destroyer over here, and another destroyer back there. That was our protection on that outer fringe. You completely in the dark. If a man would light a cigarette at night, he'd be court-martialed outside. There's a flash of light. If you throw a cigarette butt over, imagine thousands of cigarette butts. A periscope finds them, they follow it. And follow that trail and run you down. There's all kinds of precautions that you have to exercise. Of course, you sleep with your life raft on, your life jacket on all the time. Of course, clothes on. So that was all that crossed over. Hurrying to. It took 10 days. Remember, we sailed on Lincoln's birthday, February the 12th. Arrived in, zigzagged across, went down the Irish Sea, landed at Liverpool. We did. Some of the rest went on the 22nd, Washington's birthday. So that's easy to remember. Now, the life of men on the ship is miserable. The life of officers are relatively comfortable. Had the best meals I ever had in the Army. Sitting in the main dining room. We were the 3rd shift, warrant officers on the 3rd shift. Beautiful meals. Anytime, 3 or 4 choices, because they preferred it, the same thing that it was a cruise ship converted to the Leif Erikson. And just so between officers and men, quite a difference, and certainly in that situation. They fed 2 meals a day. It took them from 6 o'clock in the morning till 12 to feed breakfast. They started at 12 to feed supper. In other words, you came at 6, you'd come back at 12, and all the way down. Cooks, and they're cooking on field kitchens to feed. That ship was supposed to hold about 400 people. Had 8,000 on the ship. And keep it to it. What we did, we stayed in England for 5 months. We were slated to go in D-Day. We were slated to go in D-Day. The 30th Division, and we were down in the southern section in a town called Chichester, in training against the mock-ups, knowing exactly what the landing would be, what to expect, what divisions, what the Germans had over there, and where we were going to land, all top secret. So suddenly one day we got orders that we were to move back to London, in the London area, Buckinghamshire. And the rumor was, and rumors often are true, that the commander of the 29th Division wanted the glory of D-Day. And he was from the Washington area and knew enough people, and so they shifted us, moved all of this division up to Buckinghamshire, just outside of London, Harrow, and moved the 29th down at N. They lost 70% of their personnel on D-Day. Well, the division commander was supposed to call us together and speak to us, every unit in the division, on D-1. So they called us together on the 4th of June. When was D-Day?
June 6th.
What?
June 6th.
June 6th. What was wrong? It was delayed a day. In other words, so he called us together. It was supposed to have been June the 5th. But the storm was too bad. And in Eisenhower, they had troops already sitting on the water. And they could not leave them out there, but one more day, they'd have to bring them back. Then the whole secrecy of the thing would have been blown. So probably the greatest decision any man ever had to make in the history of warfare or anything else was to make a go on June the 6th that Eisenhower made. And so it went on June the 6th. When it did, they moved us back down to Southampton in the same area to load to go. So we were there and hanging over, and I'll tell you my story there. I had a silver chain on for dog tag. You wear dog tags now? Mm-hmm. You better. Okay, you wear the silver chain? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Well, I had a silver chain. They were nice instead of that dirty rag around your neck. I hung it up on and took a shower. Somebody wanted my chain and took my dog tags. So here I go to Europe without a dog tag. I put in a replacement. And the Army moves fast. I got my dog tags a month before the war was over. I've always said, well, that's what saved my life. You've got to have a certain procedure. If you're going to have it, you've got to cut off the bottom dog tag, and I didn't have one. Therefore, by GAI, they had to keep me alive, or else they couldn't follow the procedure. They cut my bottom dog tag off, and one goes with the body, and one goes into grave registration for records. So we went across. Now crossing that channel was the most unbelievable sights I've ever seen. There were a bridge of ships going both directions, fast. Many of them had blimps tied to them to keep Stukas from coming down under them, and streamers. In other words, some of the large ships had blimps. They used to have blimps. My first thing I ever rode in the air was a blimp. You're hanging down below it, and a little mowing machine motor pushes a propeller, and you fly through the air. Before I flew in an airplane, I flew in a blimp. And so the blimps, then they used those blimps because they could be shot down then. They were useless. They were used primarily to observe artillery. Well, they were useless then. They could shoot them down, and so that what they used the blimps for then was to help keep off the dive bombers. And I'm sure crossing that channel, it must have been 1,000 ships coming. So we go across, and still stormy. And we happened to be on the thing he put us on happened to be on a little luxury yacht. And there was a band in the defense platoon. Crossing on that about 100 people, 110 maybe. There was one officer from the defense platoon, and myself and the assistant band director, 3 officers. Well, we could eat in the little cabin. The guys had to eat up on deck. And I'm sure of that 100 and some men, 100 of them were seasick. They were lying on the deck with their heads over the rail. When you go up on deck, I don't know why motion sickness I don't get. I'm fortunate that I didn't get motion sickness. But I remember this. They were talking about how it looked. And we were eating in the little crew down, 4 table, the warrant officer, myself, and the officer. He came down and said, you ought to see it up on deck. And looked, and they served a split pea soup. And that hit him. It still didn't bother. That split pea soup was just a little too much for him to eat. Our landing was relatively safe. I saw a ship hit over just beyond it. I read about later which one was it blew up. It hit a mine. And, of course, mines were floating all around. They had these portable landing areas. Our guy couldn't find it. He went up and down. Finally found it and went in. When we were on the beach, it was clear. There was no fighting on the beach. Shells were coming in. Shells were flying from artillery, but they were random. They did not have observers, so they were not making direct hits. But there was very few casualties. The first one, that ship blew up then. We transferred from that to an LCI, a landing craft infantry, which the tailgate comes down, and you walk down into the water and out. That was our disembarking on an LCI. And then we went in, and of course we didn't carry any instruments. Anybody asked that, instruments left in England. So forget that. Instruments are not to be carried in the combat area, which was good. We didn't want to haul those things around through. Anyway, I argued for it. I wanted them to go, and they wouldn't let me take them. So when we went in about 7 kilometers, probably about 4 miles in, and halted, and stayed there 5 weeks. within 4 miles of the front line, and they couldn't break out. We'd have forays. We'd take a few. The infantry would make some penetrations and come back, but we couldn't move. We didn't move. We did not have the breakout, and we stayed in that. When I got there, my luggage was on something else. I didn't find anything for about 3 days. Raining. I found a German overcoat and a Navy blanket to wrap up in and lie on the ground in the rain. Just sleeping in the rain, and no lights or anything like that. You know, you survived with this, and until the breakout. And the 30th Division led the breakout, and that's when we hit our first casualties. And I wish I had a map of Europe, and I'd show it to you sometime. But we landed Omaha Beach. They expected Utah to be Utah was the next beach up, and Pointe de Hope was that thing that had to climb up to try to get the artillery. And the funny thing about that was, by the time they climbed up there, many men shot. As they shot down it, the artillery had been moved back. There were no guns on the top of Pointe de Hope when they got there. The ones that had been expected to fire out into the water. There were guns all up and down the channel, and all those pillboxes that you see, and some of them are still there. If you go back, you'll still see those pillboxes. Incidentally, the guns were to fire up and down the beach. They were not to fire out into the ocean, onto the channel. They were firing down the beach to hit things that landed on the beach. And so the breakout, we broke out at Saint-Lô, and from Saint-Lô on down to Avranches. And I want to tell you some of this. This is where, do you still wear the French croix de guerre?
Yes.
On your sleeves?
No.
You're entitled to it. I mean, your lineage covers it. The French croix de guerre. It's a cord. We wore it twice. You have the French croix de guerre with palm. What it means is a second war. Well, we went south and stopped at a place called Mortain, and there that was about from the Brest Peninsula. So much I want to tell you, and some of it is for entertainment. Brest Harbor is in the Cherbourg Peninsula, if you know your geography that much. Brest Harbor. Well, there were many Germans in that Caratan Peninsula, and they just put a ring of troops there and held all the German troops in there, just left them. And that crowd that stayed right there of GIs came out all in the paper as the Brazil troops, because they hung around Brest. They were called the Brazil troops. There's a GI humor that has to prevail or you couldn't survive. All right, so we cut it out of Avranches. What we didn't know was the Germans were making a counterattack, trying to split the army, and they hit at Mortain. The Battle of Mortain, they hit us at Mortain. And what you do is you know exactly. We were hiding in the woods after some hill. I saw 3 columns of German tanks coming straight to us. I saw the 3 commanders get out and consult. They turned around and went back. They didn't know we were there. If one of my men had fired a shot, that would have been the end. Of course, you hold fire if you don't. Well, that's how close it was. And they hit us. Then we had a battalion surrounded. The 2nd Battalion of the 120th Infantry. It was inactivated about 5 years ago. The 2nd Battalion was up in the Western State and just inactivated. Was surrounded. That was the first surrounded troops. And so we couldn't get to them, couldn't relieve them at Mortain. They were on Hill 314 there, as depicted in pictures, and that was, and they held. And they lost probably 50% of their personnel. No food, no ammunition. They were off to surrender. A contingent of Germans came under a white flag, and they consulted. And the officer gave him some real profane answers and said no. General Williamson, picture here, I'll talk about him later. said he should have said nuts. What's that? Nuts. That's what McAuliffe is supposed to have said at Mortain, at Bastogne. But I said all along, I've said, no soldier said nuts. Do you think any soldier would have said nuts under a situation like that? Especially, well, I said all along, he never said nuts. I read within the past 2 weeks, somebody who was there, and he said what you would have thought he said. And he translated that as nuts, and it caught on so, and that was so crazy, and so, that even the German army, what's this nuts all about? Well, you can imagine what this officer told him. Because this officer at Mortain told him exactly where to go in no uncertain terms and in the most profane way he could have. He said, weren't you afraid to do that? But he said no, and they went back, and eventually we relieved them. They were relieved. But that particular thing now, it was the only picture in the Hall of Heroes in the Pentagon, is a painting of the troops at Mortain of the 30th of the 120th Infantry. So if you're ever in the Pentagon and happen to see that, in the Hall of Heroes, I went up there for the dedication of that, because sometime in recent years they put that dedication up, and it took several of us up there to see it. And General Williamson was there, who was a former band member. Right after that, we lost a large number of men at Mortain trying to save that breakout. And there's a book, Saving the Breakout, by a young girl. I've got a copy of it. Anyway, if you want to read some of this history, if you get interested in it, you ought to, as military people, be some interested in some of this. But we made the breakout, and we headed for Belgium, straight across. We crossed the Seine on pontoon bridges about 30 miles north of Paris. Across the Seine River on a pontoon bridge. We took our field glasses and we could see Sacré-Cœur. We could just picture Sacré-Cœur and the Eiffel Tower from that distance through field glasses. I thought that might be the only trip I'd get the time I did to see those, so I was peeking at them to see them. Then we went for the next 3 days to Belgium, straight across. It was supposed to have been at that time the longest combat march in history. 17 days without stopping until we ran out of gasoline, outran our supplies, and had to stop. Have to at the Belgian border. We were the first American troops in Belgium. The British had already landed up at Antwerp and had already been in, so we were not the first Allied troops in Belgium. Then we fought on across Belgium into Holland, which is the southern province of the Netherlands. Holland and the Netherlands are not synonymous. Just part of the Netherlands is Holland. That's that part down in Limburg, where the Limburg's bad cheese comes from. And that's where we crossed there. We were the first troops, Allied troops in Holland, in the Netherlands. We ended at Maastricht. Maastricht, there's a town square there named Old Hickory. If you go back there, I've been back a couple of times. They treat you royally, if you believe it. Then the military cemeteries, the 30th Division, probably most of ours were buried at Henri Chapelle in Belgium or Margraten in Holland. We probably have, in the grave sites there, I've located probably 500 at each of those graves that grow on the road. And we went on in, and then on into Germany. We were in Germany by September. Now, you have to think, invasion was June. We were in Germany in September. We'd broken through the Siegfried line, cleaned out all those dragon teeth and pillboxes, and we're holding the area. And in Germany, actually, our headquarters were right on the border in Herzogenrath, still in Holland. But no, we moved into Germany. I remember my brother was in the 7th Armored Division. He came over and visited me while I was there a couple of times, several times. We planned to get together Christmas. This was after Thanksgiving. And he came over about Thanksgiving, and he said, well, we'll get together about Christmas. We planned that way. But he walked out from that Thanksgiving, sometime after that last time he visited me there. He says, I got to tell you, we're headed south. That all bets are off. We're headed south. We don't know why. And he didn't want to get out the door until a runner came and says, we're headed south. And what was happening? That was a break into the Bulge. In the 30th Division, moved south behind the 7th Army that he was in. The 7th Army went into St. Vith. If you read all of this stuff, the Malmedy Massacre, you ever heard of that? Heard of the Malmedy Massacre? We were at Malmedy. Ellis's battalion uncovered, conquered Malmedy, the town. He liberated Malmedy. They were in Malmedy, and again bombed by our own Air Force. He had his regiment in Malmedy and thought it was secure. And they read in the Army Times that Malmedy was in the hands of the enemy, so the 8th Air Force bombed it. That's where they got their intelligence, from the Army Times. But Ellis's battalion was in Malmedy, lost several hundred men that day from their own Air Force. And I was in Malmedy later, in the same area, but I was at Francochamps at the time. That's where the big races are now. I've been back there. Everything there changed too, but people don't forget. If you visit those cemeteries, they're breathtaking. They're beautiful. I'll tell you a pet peeve of mine, though. In the middle of one of them is Patton. Not in line with the others. There's no rank in death. Major General here and a private here. But for some reason, when Patton died in an automobile accident, no less, they buried him in a mausoleum right in a big thing right in the middle, because Patton was so famous. Which irks him. Patton's not my favorite character. I'll tell you stories about an account with him when in 3rd Army Maneuvers. He commanded 3rd Army Maneuvers. Well, I resent that very much. But it's there and can't help it. They move him there. And that it's the only grave in any of those cemeteries that are different is Patton's. And if you ever visit those, it's very emotional. In our mission, we went on across, then we went back into the Bulge, and it's hard to tell you what that weather was like. If you can go for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in rain, snow, sleet, never take your clothes off, except long enough to bathe briefly in that weather, then put your boots back on. Put your feet dry, or else you'll get frostbite. I mean, keeping alive is a struggle. And sleeping out your boots or your helmet over your face is unbelievable, because you keep your helmet in case a stray bullet falling out of the air hits you. It wouldn't. They have better helmets now than for over there, I understand. They have a lot of bulletproof stuff, but these were not bulletproof. You could shoot a bullet. You could shoot a bullet through the helmets we had. But if you can see what that is perpetually, from the December the 16th when we moved in there until we moved back up to Germany in February. That's what the Battle of the Bulge was. Somewhere, this is published every week, every month, stories of this. Any of you want to read them? I'll get you some to read. I think it's in this one, though, that somebody was there when McAuliffe made that statement. And he quoted McAuliffe. He said, "What I suspected, and nobody ever told me, because McAuliffe said what I thought he said. He didn't say nuts." That's a fantastic story. Right? And when the Bulge was over, we went back into Germany, in Holland. Stayed there for a while, getting replacements. Constantly you see replacements coming in. That's the sad part. The replacements are not experienced enough to deal with the first few days of combat. They just don't know enough. The training, you can't train them. You've got to live it for a few days before you can know anything about survival, and then of course you don't survive always. Well, then we started the breakout, the push for Germany. we crossed the Rohr River at Dusseldorf. Somebody mentioned Dusseldorf today, or yesterday sometime. We crossed it at Dusseldorf, and we went on up into the Hamburg area, northern Germany, straight across. We moved into 9th Army. A former division commander became General Simpson, Lieutenant General Simpson, became commander of 9th Army, and he asked for us to be a spearhead division. Wasn't that nice? And so he pulled us in to be a spearhead division crossing Germany, which we went all the way across to the Elbe River, where we were by the Potsdam Agreement to wait for the Russians. We could have been in Berlin, but politics operates to keep the Russians. So we had to sit there and wait for the Russians at Magdeburg, which is right on the Elbe, about 45 miles from Berlin. And then we pulled back down south and waited until the end of the war. That's when I went back to Paris and pulled that maneuver that I told you about there. So I got out of the Army of Occupation. I was in the Army of Occupation about 2 months, which is, and you know, you get 300 medals for that. And I'll tell you a little bit of a disdain I had. I think some of these pictures show me without a medal on it. I think at that time I wouldn't put those, what we called them was spam ribbons. It showed how much spam you've eaten. You know, and so I wouldn't put them on. And the guys came to me and said, "Why don't you?" And I told them I didn't want to wear them. It was almost an inverse thing. Why should I wear that? What? To show I'm a hero? They're in the graves over there. So I had that type of a anti feeling for them. But in the half, I said, "All right, you put them on." So they would take them and assemble them, and I'd put them on, pin them on. I have never tried to line them up, but I'd put them on and wear them. Now you wear, and the guys would fix them for me. I wouldn't fix them, but I'd pin them on. I would, and you wear the Presidential Unit Citation. Don't you still wear it?
3 of them.
Yes. All right. Now that's awarded by the President to units whose distinction in combat is significant. Now that's what you're wearing. It was awarded to the band. So you're wearing it not because the division only wore it, but because of the band's action in combat. And General Ingram said something to you all one time. Sometimes, Dennis, the story of the Weave War maneuvers and how we captured some of the special forces, and they thought, and the damn band did it of all. By the way, throughout the years, I never heard anything but the damn band. I thought it was one word. I make no apology for the attack I took on this, because I'm just trying to tie you in of what all of my years have interlaced and interfaced with. And I can only say, as I quote from Jason as he got back from the Aeneid, saying, "All of this I saw, and part of this I was." Thank you.